born November 7th, 1918, same year my mother was born. William Franklin Billy Graham was born in North Carolina. 1934, he becomes a Christian at age 16. 1944, now we start getting into the important stuff. He hosts his first radio show, Songs in the Night, which includes gospel, country gospel favorites and that sort of thing. His career takes off at the very end of World War II. I don't have it in the list here. But he starts getting asked to speak at kind of Youth for Christ events. And they discover that if they ask, the pastor of the local church to be the head of the event, that 12 people come. And if they ask the youth pastor of the local church to lead it, well then 13 people come. When they asked Billy Graham to do it, 70,000 people to come. And they picked up that trend. And so it really starts right at the end of World War II. 1945, I think, is his first football stadium appearance. And the place is packed. And everybody's shocked. They don't get it. Why is this guy so popular? 1949, his Greater Los Angeles revival runs for 8 weeks. Can you imagine doing a revival here? We've done it in the past. Can you imagine putting a tent up out in the parking lot and there being enough excitement and enough people to last 8 weeks?
This wasn't every Sunday. This was like every
This was every day. Yeah, 30,000, 40,000 people every day would come out to hear Grace. Amazing. He made use of something that was new. It started, I guess, in the 30s with Harriet Meeks, I think her name is. But what we call the parachurch organizations. Prior to that, everything was focused on denominations. And then starting in the 30s, you had this new structure that they were considered themselves evangelical, and they didn't care what denomination you were from. And Billy Graham really took advantage of that. Because when Billy Graham would come into town, it wasn't just Baptists that went to see him, or Presbyterians, or Pentecostal. Everybody went to see him. And that's because he never closely associated himself with the denomination. 1950, Billy Graham showed The Hour of Decision Begins. Anybody ever watch that? It would eventually be broadcast on 1,000 stations nationwide, which even by today's standards is a lot of stations. And I think that would eventually be surpassed by Pat Roberts and whatnot. But 1950, that's a lot of stations.
Today, Rush Limbaugh doesn't have that many stations.
On the radio.
On the radio.
1950 also, founding the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. So he's getting so popular he needs his own. 1954, Billy Graham Crusade in London raised $2 million. 1954, Graham appears on the cover of Time magazine. 1956, Billy Graham co-founds Christianity Today, the magazine which still is published today. 1957, okay, this is one of those done moments. People who are not fundamentalists or evangelicals, often people who are not Christians, tend to lump evangelicals and fundamentalists together. And in 1957, there was a split between the fundamentalists and the evangelicals, and that split has they've never come back together. It's like the schism in Eastern Orthodox and the Catholic Church. They have never come together. Yeah, come on ahead. So Billy Graham publicly, and he was doing his New York crusade, New York City. And again, they drew 2 million people, and it went on for 7 or 8 weeks. And at one point, he invited Martin Luther King Jr. on stage with him. And that's when the fundamentalists got up and walked out. And the evangelicals stayed. And that was the split. The other reason was he was the ecumenicalist. He was meeting with, he'd be happy to meet with the Catholic representatives or representatives from other religions. And fundamentalists didn't agree with that. So there was actually an official split. Carl McIntyre was the head of the fundamentalists back then, and they split. 1983, receives the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Ronald Reagan. 1991, Graham speaks to 250,000 people in Central Park. The reason I put that one in is here it's like, what, 40 years after he starts his ministry, and he can go into the heart of secular humanism, New York City. It's draw 250,000 people. The most famous evangelist of the second half of the 20th century. Anybody argue with that?
No.
I think you could say he's the most famous Protestant of the second half of the 20th century. In his day, Billy Sunday was probably as famous as Billy Graham was at the beginning of the 20th century. Amy Semple McPherson in the teens and 20s was probably as famous as he was. But second half of the 20th century, he was it. He was the face of Protestantism. His London and New York crusades in the 1950s drew 2 million people each. Amazing stuff. Known as the preacher to the presidents, and I think most of our presidents need a little religion from time to time. Starting with Dwight Eisenhower and all the way up through Obama. Now, his health is not great, so the meeting with Obama was kind of ceremonial and perfunctory, but certainly all through the 60s and 70s and 80s, he was very close to all the presidents, both the Republican and Democrat. Okay, so why is he in there? Why is he number 7? Why did I include him in the cherished top 10 position? He shepherded Protestantism into the electronic communications age. And he did this almost all by himself. I mean, it's really astonishing what he did. Making effective use of radio and then television, magazines, and he really was the pioneer of all of that. And it brought Protestantism to a larger audience. It made it possible for people who don't go to church every Sunday to still listen to a Protestant preacher. And it was pretty amazing stuff. And certainly the other religious networks that started up in the 60s and 70s, I mean, he's the father of all that. Pat Robertson and whatnot, who started their own television network, not just stations, but networks. That all comes out. Okay, so that's one reason. He's the guy who brings Christianity into the electronics age. But just as importantly, maybe most important, prior to World War II, what was the center of Christianity in the world? Europe. It was in Europe. It was England and France and Germany and Italy and Spain. That was the center of Christianity. Where's the center of Christianity today?
Africa.
I think it's becoming Africa. I think in 20 years it will be Africa. But today it's the United States. This is Billy Graham that did that. Now, obviously secular humanism is taking over in Europe, so Europe going down is not the result of Billy Graham. But America becoming the center of Christianity in the world, which has a stunning ramifications, that's Billy Graham that did that. And he did it almost by himself. Amazing, amazing stuff. So post-World War II, America becomes the heart. During Graham's lifetime, including radio and television broadcasts, probably tops 2 billion. And Billy Graham was quoted, this is about 10 years ago, so this isn't new. He was saying that sometimes he's scared. He was scared of the power that he had, the reach that he had. Because you look at the great preachers in history, Calvin, Luther, or St. John Chrysostom. It would be cool to go hear Augustine preach. Oh, it's Sunday, let's go hear Augustine. So even the Wesleys at their peak, 10,000, 20,000 might be the most I would speak to. Billy Graham would do a crusade that would be beamed around the world, and 1 billion people would watch it. He said he was scared sometimes at how much influence he had. That every time he gave a sermon, 1 billion people, communication age has really changed all the rules. And you see Christianity now developing in places that it never would have before, like in China.